a place for conversations. SDAQ&A. You're safe to speak your truth. Common ground, shared beliefs with lots of room for disagreement. Tell us all what you believe and let us see if we can challenge you. From all paths coming here to share their stories. Some have left this global church, some remain and defend her. Where are you on the path? Does Ellen still appeal to you? SDAQ&A, you are welcome here. 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 Oh, SDAQ&A, you are welcome here. SDAQ&A, you are welcome here. A place for conversations. SDAQ&A. You're safe to speak your truth. Common ground, shared beliefs with lots of room for disagreement. Tell us all what you believe and let us see if we can. You love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same, never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, and all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same, will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same, will never be the same ever again.
God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. Good to have you here again today. Quick reminder, tomorrow at this exact time, we have Good News Fellowship over on the Good News Fellowship channel. And we have Nancy and Mark Claiborne back with us. It's going to be fantastic. But today, and welcome everybody, good to see you all in the chat. I love our chat. It's always very engaging, whether it's on the topic or not, doesn't matter. We're having a conversation, and I really, really enjoy it. And love having you guys around. So don't forget, lean forward, click that like button. Also, welcome to Twitter. We're now beaming live, and we will be every show to Twitter, X. So, and also another channel called Twitch. So at the moment, we're live to Twitter, YouTube, 2 YouTube channels, Facebook, and Twitch. 5 channels live. We're expanding, everybody. SDAQ&A is growing. And if you'd like to be a part of that expansion and help me, because with each new expansion comes some monthly costs. And I think you guys are enjoying the program. So if so, please just go down there and to www.paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. And yeah, throw me a few dollars so I can continue this program. So today's show, very interesting. I will be doing a replay of an interview I did 5 years ago with Dr. Eric Anderson, who is the editor of this book. See down there, Dr. Eric Anderson. Lovely guy. I really enjoyed this interview. They are finally becoming public. Very few people have seen these interviews over there on Facebook. They were in the private group, but now they are going public. The reason I say it's an interesting interview is because we see the seeds of this notion of the progressive, that's not my Adventism, I can be any kind of Adventist I want, growing to this point. And you can see the seeds of my discontent with the progressives growing. And I haven't watched this interview for a long time, but I'm wondering if I was at all pushing back and saying, look, you guys need to do more, because when you do speak your gem of Adventism, your progressive Adventistic view, it gets shut down by leadership. And my memory is that Dr. Eric would have been saying, oh, yes, we are growing, things are changing, we can make a difference, Glacier view won't happen again. He definitely is a realist. He could see problems going on and continuing. But I wonder if the hope that he was demonstrating in the interview you are about to see had any idea that my assessment was accurate, that sure, be any kind of Adventist you want until you try being that Adventist on a public platform, books, social media, etc. I'm not feeling smug at all that these guys were banned within 6 days, that this book was banned within 6 days. I would love to see some kind of revising of the prophet within Adventism, a lowering of her authority. But as I predicted, anytime you are being an Adventist that you want to be, you will see the cookie cutter descend, coming down from on high, and you will have limbs chopped off and ideas chopped off, and you will be brought into line, or you will be fired, cancelled, suppressed. So come on, you good people of the Progressive Adventist movement that feel you can be any kind of Adventist you want. That's not my Adventism. Come on the show and prove me wrong. Come on the show and share with me your special kind of Adventism, the unique kind that isn't aligned with the pillars of Adventism. Come and share with me, especially if you are an ordained pastor, currently employed, or any kind of Adventist worker employed by the church. And my theory will be proven correct, that very, very few of you will. I think in 5 years, I broadly count 4 or 5 people. One became ill soon after. One was on the brink of retirement. Another one changed jobs soon after. And the other one was more not wanting to answer questions, but would answer a few specifics. So I'm suggesting that you come on, and I would love Dr. Eric Anderson back on, and any of the guys that I've interviewed that were a part of this book, and share with me, as the brave John Butler did a few weeks ago. Thank you, John Butler. Yeah, come on and share this kind of progressive Adventism that you speak of, that puts Ellen back further on the bus, that sees her as inspirational more than having the spirit of prophecy, or she has the essence of prophecy. No, your denomination sees her as the spirit of prophecy as identified in Revelation. And anytime you say otherwise, I'm afraid you get shut down, cancelled, lose your job. It's interesting that this series that we're playing back, this is number 34 of season 2, most of the people speaking were retired and they could speak more freely. Let's get into it. Let's get away from another one of Pete's long preambles and get straight into this interview with Dr. Eric Anderson, a fine gentleman. I really enjoyed this interview, and a man of great achievement. Presidents of several fine Adventist universities, a scholar, an administrator, and a genuinely good man. Enjoy, and please comment. Keep it going. One last thing, if you're listening to the podcast, this is now, we are in 2026, and we are about to dive back. Wow, 5 years, 6 years ago now. Boy, where is the time going? To season 2, where I did 86 programs and interviewed many, many people that were at Glacier View or knew a lot about it. Here's Dr. Eric Anderson. Hello and welcome to SDAQ&A podcast, and now also live to our Facebook group. So if you're listening to this and would like to join the group and enjoy watching the interviews as well as interacting as well, the great thing about this platform is you can type comments and click the like button or the love heart, whatever you want. So if you're interested in joining that, just look up SDAQ&A on Facebook. There's a big red banner with white writing, and I don't think there's others out there on Facebook, but it's a private group, and we've grown. We call it ISO, short for isolation. During the isolation period that the virus has brought on, we've managed to grow from about 100 members to, I think we're hitting 1,200 at the moment.
So Q&A stands for quarantine and answer then?
Oh, I like it. I think I'm going to enjoy this interview. Quarantine and answer. I like it. So, my very special guest today is Dr. Eric Anderson. Welcome. Can I call you Eric?
Yes, absolutely.
Welcome, Eric. Great to have you here.
It's good to be here. It's a little mysterious. I'm trying to imagine those 10 or 15 or 20 people who are watching as well. I suppose Jill is one of them.
Let me have a look. Jill has just joined in, and she's actually said, "Hello, Eric. Happy memories of long ago."
Good, good.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you've heard too much about this particular series or not. I think Lance or Jill have invited you to be with us today. And we're just kind of looking back as a bit of a retrospective of Glacier View, which next month will be 40 years. And it's an interesting time to look at, not to point fingers or lay blame, but just to have an open, authentic discussion and reflection. And I think I mentioned this is interview number 34 of this series, and there are 25 maybe podcasts prior to this as well. But from now on, we're going to be going live as well as the podcast, and we'll continue on after Glacier View with other themes and topics. But it's just interesting to look at this time period where some people want to kind of push it under the carpet and say forget it. Some people want to talk about it so that healing can happen. And a lot of that has happened. Eric, I get a lot of emails from people already that are saying just by talking about it, there's been a lot of healing going on. We were hit pretty hard here in Australia. There was, I think, per capita quite had a bigger impact on us. We had lost about 180 to 200 pastors at that time, largely because they were kind of encouraged out of the church. and when you think about it, there were, the wives, the children, families were affected, and it has left quite a dent in the emotional psyche, and there's been a lot of stress associated with it. So instead of hiding the topic, we're keen to talk about it with the aim of bringing some kind of healing and resolution and understanding. And I think the truth can certainly not fear scrutiny. So I thought before we kind of dig into that, I'd just love to find out a little bit about your background, previous generations. Adventists all know how to say how many generations they were. I'm actually fifth generation Seventh-day Adventist. I was fifth generation Seventh-day Adventist, and I noticed someone's made a comment in one of our past interviews that Des was only a first generation Adventist or something like that. So tell us a bit about your generational involvement with Adventism, your family life, were you born an Adventist, etc., where you studied, and on to your work as PUC president, and I think you said Southwestern president, and your work as a history teacher at PUC.
Well, I'm currently the director of something called the Walter Utz Center for Adventist History at PUC, and we collect a lot of historical materials relating to the history of PUC and the history of Adventism. We have in recent years received some very significant things relating to Desmond Ford, to the presentation in 1979 at the Forum meeting.
That's the famous
the
October 27 one, isn't it?
All those things. And I can share some of those today. I'm the fourth generation of my family to teach at PUC.
Wow.
My grandmother was the first college graduate here in 1912.
Wow.
And her father taught here, her son taught here, and now I'm teaching at PUC. I was educated, though this is the sort of embarrassing secret, I did not attend PUC.
Oh.
I went to Andrews, and then I did my doctoral work at the University of Chicago in American history, history of the South, also a secondary field in Southeast Asian history. And then I came here in 1975. So at the time that what we call the Ford crisis was brewing, I was a young teacher here. I remember being present at that forum meeting in October of 1979. I was not at Glacier View, so I can't say anything firsthand about that, although I could say something about the way it was received here at PUC.
Can you tell
later
us?
Later on, I went bad after being a teacher for many years. In 2005, I went over to the dark side and became an administrator for 9 years.
I love how Adventism has different pockets. There's administrators, there's teachers, there's pastors, there's scholars and academics.
But Walter Rudd had a theory that he called the theory of the two heavens, which maintained that administrators there must be a separate heaven for administrators because they had to do so many nasty things they couldn't get into the regular one. I don't know if there's any theological value in that or not.
They had to get down and dirty.
Yeah.
Bring politics into play.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about, I'm interested, I haven't really explored this, and I think in our conversation you mentioned that you hadn't either, but I'm interested in looking at the 1976 Palmdale meetings on righteousness by faith, where Des was one of the delegates, I guess, or one of the people invited to discuss it and explore it. Can you just tell us a little bit of anything that you know about that? Only in that I feel that it was kind of the starting point in some ways of the immediate lead up to the PUC forum and to Glacier View.
Well, as you can imagine, as we came up to the 40th anniversary of the Adventist Forum meeting here on campus, we had a lot of discussion among Adventist scholars about what that meant. And one of the themes that came out of that conversation was that we are making a mistake if we just look at 1979 or 1980 or 1981, that this whole crisis has a context and a broad context. A number of people who I've talked to about this would say, you can't understand the debate about the book of Hebrews or about the sanctuary unless you put it in the context of this larger debate about righteousness by faith. Some people would even go further and say we really need to go back into the 1950s and see the debate about questions on doctrine.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of that theory. Yeah.
So that very much the what we call the Ford crisis has some real roots to it that go back a long ways. Yeah,
and I guess like people have often said to me, you even go back to 1888 with the great conference on righteousness by faith, and I think in my theory, my armchair philosopher, novice historian, I see a tremendous change in the church after questions on doctrine based on a large number of people feeling that their church had been taken from them, but it also created a fertile bed for a new theology to kind of come out and new discussions and understandings on righteousness by faith. There seemed to be a bit of a change in the idea of the nature of Christ. And so that book created, I think, a fertile bed for what was to then proceed. And you've got the early Brinsmead kind of era, where he switched from being very conservative to more liberal. You've got the Andreessen supporters. You've got the birth of in Australia here of the Concerned Brethren and the Standish brothers, their involvement with Heartland in America, and that all leads up to the teachings of Des at Avondale College, and that then leads into the 1976 Palmdale, the Forum, Glacier View, and the explosion afterwards. So I'm interested in your thoughts on questions on doctrine as well, actually, if you could unpack a bit of your thoughts on that.
I think what we see is a period of time in the 1950s and early 60s in which Adventism is determined to explain itself to the wider world. And that attempt shows up in a lot of ways. It shows up, I think, in the Bible commentary. It shows up in questions on doctrine. It shows up in some of these conversations that we're having with other Christians. I think beginning in the mid-60s, under the leadership of Elder Pearson, we shift to a more inward-looking approach where we're not as interested in explaining what we believe to the wider Protestant world or the wider evangelical world. So that would be another contextual thing to think about, that we are, for a time, very eager to explain ourselves. And then I think by the time we get up to 1979, that's shifted, and we're more focused on a defensive position and inward look.
Yeah. And in many ways, that was politically maneuvered because when people felt that with Walter Martin and is it Donald Barnhouse, that you know, they were going to write a book about Adventism, including Adventism as being a cult, and so there was like even a higher desire to be seen as more evangelical to the general church body. Do you think, therefore, that the was it Frieda, the Froome and Ray Anderson, was it? And I can't remember the third guy. Do you think they were kind of
Roy Anderson.
Roy, that's right. Were they extra motivated to appease Martin and Barnhouse, and kind of went a little bit too far with the adjustments to the Adventist theology, or were they genuinely seeking?
I don't think so. I think what we're seeing is an evolution, a change. Maybe I shouldn't use that word. A change over time, where Adventism moves from our fundamental beliefs, say in 1872, to something different. Part of that process would be the 1888 General Conference. It would be a number of things, but by the time we get up to the early 20th century, we are teaching I think you could say, a much more complete gospel than we were teaching in the 1870s.
Right.
And I see this as part of that overall process, that in questions on doctrine, we're again trying to focus on a mainstream. We're trying to focus on certain developments that seem to us to be very positive. You could put it in the broader context, for example, of Adventism moving away from an anti-Trinitarian position to a Trinitarian position.
Yeah, that was a big shift.
And some of the people who were unhappy about questions on doctrine were people who had some roots in that anti-Trinitarian position.
What?
But that's all very broad context, and I do think it's important to keep that in mind. And what happened in relation to Desmond Ford and what he was saying has to be put in that context.
Yeah. Just before we kind of delve into that, I'm interested in you know, what inspired you to become a historian?
Well, at a rather early age, I decided I wanted to study history. It may have had something to do with my father or my grandmother, who were very interested in history, and somehow or other that seemed like fun, and I gradually caught on someone who would pay me to do this.
What was your PhD on? What was the subject?
Well, the thesis I wrote was on a particular congressional district in North Carolina that in Reconstruction and its aftermath elected 4 black congressmen, which is very unusual. So I was looking at Reconstruction, I was looking at race relations in the last 25 years of the 19th century. I guess back to your other question, why did I get interested in history? Certain teachers had a big impact on me.
Yeah.
One who had a tremendous impact was Harry Leonard at Newbold College. Another would be Don McAdams at Andrews University. Those people gave me an idea of what you could really do with history, and particularly an example of a kind of exciting teaching.
And when you were at PUC, you were teaching denominational history.
Well, yes, we started a class in SDA history about the time that this whole crisis came in.
Because
And so it was a very exciting time to be teaching Adventist history.
yeah,
And it got really exciting when we had summer seminars, a whole workshop with, I think one summer we had 50 or 60 people, mostly teachers. And some of them were coming in with great suspicion.
mm,
They were aware of the controversy over Desmond Ford, and they were wondering if we were tainted by the same ideas.
mm,
Um, so those people would be alert and ready to quarrel with you. And then there were other people who had secretly kind of rejected Ellen White. And as we tried to give a historical context to her teaching, tried to give a realistic view of Ellen White, they would come up afterwards and say, oh, I'd given up on her, and now I see I don't really need to.
right.
They found what we were saying very constructive. The same thing some people thought was subversive.
Yeah, yeah. What interests me is, like, I was a young boy in 1980, probably, I don't know, 18 or something, 16, and living here in Kurrambong where there was, you could feel these explosions going off at too young to really understand about it. But one thing I did really notice pre-1980, living on campus, living around the area, Dad was a lecturer up at college, and just there was a sense of that there were a lot of different people holding a lot of divergent views, but having really interesting conversations, and they seemed to be able to kind of balance friendship and conversation almost in a very hearty, healthy kind of way. But post 80, I remember actually going to Avondale College then and being a student and then going out and teaching for a while. I noticed that you were less able to speak so openly about any divergent views, and the leadership was quite keen to keep people talking about less controversial things. And in fact, in the early 80s, a fax went around at least New South Wales anyway, the churches, and a pastor friend of mine showed me this fax, and it was from the division saying that the churches were not to invite Des Ford or George Burnside to speak at the churches. And Des, of course, was more of the liberal theology, and Burnside was he was actually a member of the Concerned Brethren. So I thought it was interesting that the administration, these politicians we were talking about earlier, the admin, were wanting to stop the conversation on both ends.
Yeah.
So this time period...
That's natural that they would
Yeah.
react.
And this time period that you talk about in the 70s there, I would love to have been, in my 20s at PUC or Andrews, around 76 to 79. This sounds like it was a really interesting time where there were lots of different views being shared and some really interesting conversations being had. Can you talk a bit more about that kind of fertile, bed of conversation?
Well,
Garden bed?
there were some very positive things that happened. Des comes to campus in 1977, I believe, as a visiting professor.
Yeah.
The original plan is for him to be here for 2 years. That's extended to a third year. He had a big impact on campus. He taught Sabbath school class. He gave lots of public lectures. It was a very positive experience. But I must say, throughout this whole time, there was an undercurrent of anger and resentment and opposition, so that the conversations were not always very positive.
So not
I remember
maybe...
I remember a young man who was one of the most extreme anti-Ford people. And I was, as a naive young teacher, I thought I should reason with people, try to change their minds and so on. And that didn't always work. But anyway, he came to my office and I said, I'm distressed about some of the personal attacks that are being made upon Desmond Ford. I wish people would focus on the issues. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. Who's making personal attacks? And I said, well, okay, if I were to say Desmond Ford is a tool of the devil, would that be a personal attack or would that be dealing with the issues? He said that would be dealing with the issues.
Oh my goodness.
That's an extreme
Yeah. So
review, but there were people out there
maybe
like that.
maybe my youthful romantic notion of what had preceded me wasn't as accurate as I thought. Can you say
Well, there were plenty of people who had a positive reaction, but there were some people that had this very, very negative.
I think perhaps really what boils down to what I'm saying is that post 80, my generation were not allowed to talk about it, and we weren't even presented with the two different sides for a time. I didn't really get to start exploring it until the early 90s, whereas at least pre 80 there was discussion going on. Can you
Yes,
say
and I think a lot of people had the feeling that this period of crisis had led to destructive controversy. So maybe religious conviction is dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess the admin guys were thinking, look, to fix the problem, let's just shut down the bell curve on both sides and try and stop the conversation. How wrong could they be? 40 years later, it's as robust as ever. This is a question from Jill, and it may not relate to this time period, but I'm just kind of reading sequentially down my list here. She says, would you like to talk to us about Walter, is it Ut or Ut, U-T,
Yeah.
and his take on these problems?
Well, Walter was a teacher at PUC starting in the 1950s. So by this time, he is near the end of his career. He's been here almost 30 years. And he has a great deal of influence on campus. He would, by 1979, have been the author of the college history. He had a lot of interesting things he said about this crisis. Perhaps the most interesting was this. He said Desmond Ford was guilty of talking in front of the children. Kind of like a couple of parents saying there's certain things we will not talk about in front of the children.
Mm.
And Ford brought to general public knowledge the perplexing issue of our interpretation of the book of Hebrews. And that was the way he summarized it.
Mm.
That this had been known, it had been discussed quietly among scholars, but here's a man who simply spills the beans. He tells everybody about it. He talks in front of the children.
Yeah, okay.
And that seems like a pretty perceptive observation, that if he hadn't been talking in front of the children, if this had been a conversation among religion teachers, it might not have been as explosive.
And I guess initially he was keeping it very much just in-house, even to the point of Glacier View, where the consensus document came along and he was kind of quite happy to go along with that. It seems to me, and I'm very keen to unpack it in a minute, that he went along to the forum at PUC, the October 27, 1979, the big one, pretty much thinking it was just going to be a discussion with scholars and academics and a chance for him just to share his views in-house. And through it being obviously very popular, they moved rooms and eventually got into the biggest room with, I think, 1,000 people. And that then exploded with cassettes being sent all around the world. So perhaps he wasn't so much saying it to the children, but the people who kind of, wanted him to speak in-house didn't really keep the lid on it themselves so well.
Well, a couple of my friends came up with a very provocative title for his talk.
Yeah.
It was told the investigative judgment, theological milestone or historical necessity.
Ah, yeah.
And that was not Des's formula.
No.
It was the people who were planning the meeting and it did have the effect of getting a good turnout.
Well, see, that confirms my point that you can't really blame Des for being invited to what he thought was a fairly in-house forum to share his views, for them creating the media attention and the
Well, and of course the technology of recording,
yeah.
and he couldn't just have a Sabbath afternoon conversation with
Yeah.
teachers at PUC. It would be in Singapore in the next week.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the explosion of that technology back then is equating to the explosion of our current kind of social media platforms, where all of a sudden we've got Zoom, we're talking, across the different sides of the world, we're having interviews that, like over a couple of hundred people watching, documents that will go around the world, as they did 40 years ago. There's the new technology, and maybe a lot of that has a part to play in it more than Des's own personal intentions.
Now, Walter, back to Walter Rudd. He was very sympathetic to Ford, although he was not an advocate or a follower of Ford. He made some wry comments. He talked about the debate over justification and sanctification at PUC as the Australian disease. And later, he made it clear what his own views were. He wrote in a letter to one of his students, each of us, they say, makes a God in his own image. So therefore, I know that God, being an English gentleman, somewhat of the views of C.S. Lewis, prefers a tilt to the justification side, but is able to understand and pity the zealots, even if he doesn't necessarily have to agree with them. that was his kind of.
He sounds like quite a erudite, articulate, very intelligent man. And I think I've in interviewing, lots of scholars in this series and academics, there seems to be a thread of them wishing Des had kind of taken the foot off the accelerator a bit more. But Australians are quite, we're a bit rambunctious, and I'm half New Zealand and half Australian, and so the New Zealanders are the same.
It has something to do with being from Queensland too.
Yeah, there's kind of a you can zero down then on which part of Queensland as well, north or south. But in my look at it, it's more something that just got swept away, and not something that I think he was intentionally desiring to be a provocative kind of thing. I think if Bob Brinsmead had been the one in the seat at the time, history would have exploded in a very different way.
Well, it is interesting, as the controversy developed, Adventist teachers at various schools would come up with stories. For example, we had the big crisis at PUC, and the people at Walla Walla said, well, it's those people at PUC, they're too provocative. Well, a few years later, the crisis came to Walla Walla. About the same time, there was a crisis at Southern. So it can't all be just a matter of personalities.
No, exactly. There's the time, there's the media, there's a contentious issue. There is the reality that Des was trying to bring people a sense of assurance. And if you post that into a church that believes Jesus is coming any day, well, you don't want to be waiting and going slow. You want to tell people right now that your salvation is assured. So I think there was a sense of urgency which Adventism kind of has in its very DNA to these things, and so it sort of surprises me when people go, "Oh, he should have just taken his time and been a bit slower." And I think there's way more.
Well, there was a position that certain liberal Adventists had, that this doctrine was quietly fading away, and we just needed to keep quiet about it, and it would eventually disappear.
Which doctrine
didn't approach things that way?
Which doctrine was fading
The
away?
doctrine of investigative judgment.
Yeah.
At least as it was taught in the 19th century.
Yeah. I had a very interesting chat to George Knight about that. You're welcome to join our group and watch that one if you like.
Okay. You can count on George to say something interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it was a very interesting conversation. I tried not to let him off the hook. um, I'm fascinated by the investigative judgment and how people think it's fading away even to this day. Like, my thoughts are that, you know, the evangelists bring people into the church, young people are born into the church, and we think that this terrible elephant in the room is fading away. But the Great Controversy book is still heavily promoted. It's sanctioned, always has been, and they stumble across this, and it's almost like putting kids into a pool and just saying, don't swim down that end because there's a piranha. But you're eventually, unless there's walls there or the piranha is taken out of the water, they're eventually going to stumble across it. And I think what Des was seeing in his kind of in his foresight, in his ability to see ahead, was if this isn't finally addressed, it's just going to keep on coming back again and again and again and again. And I think he's right. It's still the elephant in the room. It still percolates
Is
beneath.
it the same teaching as the teaching of the 19th century? You know, as people have arguments and debates, they will change even when they say they're not changing. So it seems to me that the defenders of what they would see as the traditional teaching on the investigative judgment use different terminology, use different even scriptural interpretation than existed before 1979 or existed, say, in 1879.
Yeah. And therefore,
we come up with new terminology. The whole element that added great uncertainty that at any moment the investigative judgment could move from the dead to the living and your probation would close. I don't hear that preached in Adventism today. Maybe I'm not going to the right place.
yeah, what I've discovered is that most people that kind of say what you're saying aren't totally aware of what's really going on at a kind of a really grassroots level, purposely a bit behind the scenes. And I think I was lucky to be a musician invited to lots of different. So I would sing for what we call over here the Grey Nomads, which are you and I, with people that have retired, and they would have their own camp meetings over here, huge. Like, you'd have 1,000 people turn up to these beautiful camp meetings, and I'd come along and I'd sing all the hymns, and then I'd be invited to a very contemporary young people's program, and we'd be singing all the latest contemporary praise and worship. And so in doing that, I'd be then billeted out behind the scenes to people's houses. And I was quite shocked for, probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago to really be in on some conversations with a lot of the really conservative people on how they are really making moves to bring their church back. They're focused, they're funded, they are, they've helped Ted Wilson get into power. And then along under them is arising a lot of young people that are very interested in the original historic kind of version of investigative judgment as taught by Ellen White in The Great Controversy. There is a deep and huge number of people coming up underneath. So for a lot of people like you and I, even the millennials kind of just think, oh, this is rubbish, let's not even think about it. To us, we don't really hear it anymore. But if you go out to a lot of the churches, and I'd be sitting there in the audience waiting to be invited up to sing a song or two, the sermons are about that again. They are very...
Well, I have not run into that.
Yeah. If you're around Currumbong and Avondale, no. If you're in certain pockets of New South Wales, North New South Wales, no. I imagine if you're at PUC or if you're at Andrews, no. But I believe that Ted Wilson theology is a very conservative historicist kind of theology, and it's permeating once again into the church. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd want to look closely at the way in which things change, even for people who are resisting change. And I would look at what the seminary teaches, what those who are seeing themselves as defenders of the faith teach, and I think there is significant change over time, even in that situation. But I may be wrong about that. I don't know. It seems like we talk about a pre-Advent judgment. We talk about the book of Hebrews in a different way than we did in an earlier time, saying our understanding is not inconsistent with what Hebrews teaches. Well, that's quite different from the tone of the earlier time.
And look,
Yeah.
I could well be wrong.
Yeah.
I'm only going from a feel, mine's kind of anecdotal evidence.
Well, I think doctrine, in order to remain a living doctrine, has got to answer a question.
Yeah.
Some doctrines do answer questions for a long, long period of time. Certainly, the investigative judgment answered a question for early Adventists that was a very pressing question. Where is God's providence in our experience? I'm not sure that the question is the same with the passage of time, so that the investigative judgment may not have the staying power of something like the Trinity, which explains how we can say we are worshiping God, we are approaching God through Jesus, we are being moved by the Spirit, and in order to say all those things, we end up with the doctrine of the Trinity. It's not an artificial doctrine. It's not a doctrine that doesn't explain anything. I'm wondering, for typical Adventists, it seems like the investigative judgment plays a different role than it once did.
I agree, and it's certainly, I've groups of young people we catch up just to have discussions and whatnot, and they are pretty oblivious to the investigative judgment. It plays no role in their everyday life. They don't hear it from the pulpit. I guess my concern is more, seeing the process of the compliance document taking root in policy, and at the moment it's about women's ordination. You've got to comply to that, their stated view of what it should be. You've got to comply to believing the earth's 6,000 to 10,000 years old. What's to stop them from including, and you need to have a historicist view of the investigative judgment as taught by Ellen in The Great Controversy. It concerns me. It doesn't seem to concern others, and again, I could be totally wrong. But once leadership starts saying you've got to comply to a certain bunch of rules, who makes these rules, and what if you don't want to be compliant? I see a year down the track, a lot of scholars, teachers, lecturers are suddenly going to not be allowed to say they support women's ordination for fear of being warned or losing their jobs. And I think that's what's happening in Glacier.
That I like to read a variety of things, including some things that are sort of fringe publications. And I've ended up reading some of the group that is very much opposed to women's ordination and very much opposed to change in the Adventist Church. And their comments about this compliance document are surprising.
Yeah, to share.
They think it's meaningless. They think it's not going to do anything.
So who's saying that?
The General Conference is simply making empty threats.
Who's saying that?
Well, I think a number of those in this country who are who originally reacted to compliance documents say, good, let's make these people comply. And now their reaction is, didn't mean anything. Nothing's happening. Nothing's changing.
But what
the
about
leadership of the North American Division is not taking the stands that they want them to take.
But what about
recognizing they're outnumbered?
But what about the Autumn Council, where 6 unions were warned and 2 were about to be reprimanded?
But what does it really mean?
It means that they've been given time to go away and think about it. So 3 years ago, they were told that this was brewing, go away and think about it, and people were saying, oh, it's not going to happen. And next minute, compliance document gets passed into policy, and I said to people, I think this is going to turn into warnings, reprimands and sanctions, and people said, no, it's not going to happen. It does. I don't want to interrupt or sound smug at all, but this is 5 or 6 years ago, and his message, as much as I really respect him, genuinely respect him and all his progressive academic scholars and friends, their material over the years has been incredible. So this is me jumping in 2026, those listening to the podcast. But what he is saying there is, oh, these compliance laws are meaningless. They have no teeth. That it will fade away. And here we are 5, 6 years later, and he has felt the bite of those teeth from the General Conference, the wider state, Pacific Publishing, the Seventh-day Adventist official publisher, banning his book. So I don't want to say I was right, told you so, but I do want to say this is serious. If progressive Adventists that are watching continue to take this line, and they do, they tell me every week, things are changing, Pete. This stuff's going to blow over. Let's just put it in our back pocket. It's going to fade away naturally. Adventism now is holding its pillars tighter than ever. And if you, progressive Adventist, want to survive, want to have some kind of influence inside the denomination, you need to get organized. Back to the program. What does it mean? And then next minute, Autumn Council, people are being warned. So they've been told to go away and think about it. They need to not just commission everybody. They've got to ordain men and commission women. And there's going to be a time where they have to meet again. And if they have not complied, they will now be reprimanded.
You remember all those committees that were set up? What's happened to them? They've sort of become non-functional.
Yeah.
I'm
interested in that. I'm interested in that because, to me, if I'm fascinated, if that is happening and it is being watered down, that's information we need to know, because otherwise we're almost coming to a point where we have to stave off another Glacier View kind of situation. So I'm just interested in digging a bit deeper in what do you mean by the committees have been?
Well, there were committees set up for each of those areas of compliance. And people looked closely at who was on the committees, and they noticed the presence of lawyers on each of them.
Okay.
And then the committees disappeared. Nothing was heard more of them.
Interesting.
And so it looked like there was going to be a very strong attempt to enforce compliance, and yet I don't think those committees have ever met, have ever done anything. So I guess I would put it this way: if I were an advocate of, if I were an opponent of women's ordination, I would be very discouraged right now. I'd say I'm going to lose.
Right. Okay.
I would say, for all the things that Ted Wilson has said about this, we're losing.
Interesting. So if Ted Wilson got into power again, I guess it'll be next year the vote will happen, not this year. Would you change your view then?
Well, again, I would look for not just
his stance, but what's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, what will change? The Southeastern California Conference will still have a woman president. It's not going to change. The seminary will still take a certain stand on ordination. The leading Adventist pastors and congregations in this country will not change their position.
And I guess your union in the North American division, the union, is it? Yeah. I think there's a fair bit of leverage they've got there with how much they fund the GC as well. I remember listening to Dan Jackson talking about that, and reading between the lines, he was kind of saying, guys, you better water down this approach to the compliance document or you might find you get less funding from us. Do you know Dan Jackson at all?
I know him a little bit, yeah, from the time I was at Southwestern.
Did he get any?
Invited him to speak at our campus and so on.
Right. Did he get any fallout for his hooey statement?
I don't know. It's a colorful statement.
Is that why he retired a bit earlier than he may have?
No, this was his plan to retire at this point.
Right.
And in fact, a few weeks back, maybe a couple of months back, Ted Wilson asked him to continue for another year.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But he and his wife were looking forward to retirement. He said, no, we're retiring.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. I'm appreciating that you're unpacking some of that stuff. It's very informative and it's positive, and I hope I'm wrong. So let's just dig back into that October 27, 1979. Can you tell us a little bit about the anticipation that was building up to it in the weeks leading up to it, and then tell us about the day? Were you involved with any of the organization of it?
And we met in the old Irwin Hall Chapel, which was a historic part of campus. And I remember being there and thinking, this is really historic. Something important is happening at this moment. The question that's bothered me ever since is, was there some way that this could have had a better ending than it did? He gives a speech. There's the brouhaha around the world. There's controversy. What should the church leaders have done? What should the PUC leaders have done? What could Des Ford himself have done differently? It seems like what did happen was a pretty negative thing. A person gets up and gives a talk and shortly thereafter is defrocked. Maybe that's because later I became an administrator, but I'm wondering, okay, how could you have handled this differently?
And what conclusions has that thought process had?
I do wonder how many times we mistakenly press for a final answer on something.
Yeah, okay.
I think there are a number of areas to church where we're not going to get final answers, or there are going to continue to be divisions. The policy that was adopted by PUC's administration was to ask the church as a whole to resolve this issue, and in particular to use the church's scholars to resolve the issue. Now, that's not what happened. In fact, when Glacier View occurred, it wasn't really in the end the scholars who decided it. It was administrators who decided it. What if the president of PUC had said, when controversy erupted after this speech, what if he said, that's his opinion, and he's a visiting professor who's leaving in a few months? What if the president of PUC had said to Desmond Ford, we support your academic freedom to deal with these issues. Please deal with them only in the classroom. For the next 6 months while you're still here, don't have any more public meetings on this. In a way, that would be a kind of evasive thing to do. It wouldn't be particularly inspiring, but you wonder if that would have led to something more positive than saying, oh, let's send him off to Washington.
Yeah.
Let's have him write a defense of himself and then have him be judged on that.
That's a good point.
And in fact, we know that these issues have been discussed many times earlier in church history, and there had not been a resolution or total victory for one side or the other. So that's one way I would look at it.
Yeah, that's a good.
I've been thinking
good
about it
way.
because in the process of collecting papers for the UT Center, we had an oral history interview of Dr. Jack Castle, who was the
Yeah.
president of PUC at the time. And he shared with us notes he took of a meeting about Desmond Ford with a number of key leaders from Australia and the General Conference Committee. This would be probably the Prexad Committee. He spelled out all of his concerns. And then at the end, he, after explaining all of these things, he made a comment about his reflections 30 years after the event.
This is Jack Castle.
And this is the president of PUC. He said, as I reflect after 30 years, I can only come to the conclusion that the decision to refer the Ford issue to Glacier Review was both tragic and counterproductive. Had it been handled utilizing the well-defined academic procedure as recommended initially, the result would have been much better accepted by the academic community of which Ford was a member. Church members who were less knowledgeable of the denominational history of this issue, involving Ballinger and Fletcher, and seldom have ever heard sermons on the investigative judgment, would likely have soon considered it a church matter of little concern. However, the well-publicized results of the Glacier Review meeting only served to embolden the few vocal fundamentalist critics who were quickly worked into a frenzy, considering themselves to be the only true defenders of what they referred to as historic Adventism. Their unethical attacks destroyed the personal and professional reputations and careers of numerous dedicated educational and ministerial church employees. And many college students are so disgusted by false accusations made about their teachers that they either abandon the church or change their major to permit a career outside church employment. He says this controversial doctrine, he's writing in, let's see, this would be in the late 90s. This controversial doctrine of the Adventist Church is once again dormant, but still lurking in the background, likely challenged by some minister or theologian in the not too distant future. When this happens, will the wagons once again be circled in defense, or will church leaders be mature enough to honestly and seriously consider Ellen White's counsel? Quote, there is no excuse for anyone taking the position. There is no more truth to be revealed. And all of our expositions of Scripture are without error. The fact that certain doctrines have been held as truth for many years by our people is not a proof that our ideas are infallible. Age will not make error into truth, and truth can afford to be fair. No true doctrine will lose anything by close investigation. That's a pretty unusual thing from a historian standpoint, to get the original notes and then the comment by the historical actor years later.
Yeah.
And I think he would argue that the idea he had, he and his academic dean, Gordon Madgwick, of referring this to the scholars would have worked if it had actually been referred to the scholars, and if church publications had restrained themselves in the meantime, left it an open issue until the meeting took place. But of course, that's not what happened. There were prejudging of the whole issue, and the issue wasn't decided by the scholars. So those are two different angles. I would say, well, maybe it didn't have to be resolved, or maybe Castle's right. If it were to be resolved, it will resolve in the right way. That would be better.
Do you think if that approach had happened and it had kind of been almost diffused at the start, that Jack Castle seems to infer that it'll probably be raised up again at some point. Do you think the admin, and some of these guys were smart guys, were people like Neil Wilson going, look, we've had from Ballinger right through to Brinsmead, we've had this cycle repeat, and often because we've just said, look, let's just let that go. Like the 1919 conference is another classic where the minutes disappeared till the mid-70s. were they thinking that method hasn't worked? We can see historically that it hasn't worked. Let's try a more nip it in the bud approach. Was that why they kind of didn't go the path that you're kind of pondering?
Well, I think they all assumed that Des was the same as Ballinger.
Mm.
And, you know, this last year, listening to Des's tape again, listening to his presentation again.
You're talking about the 79, the forum meeting. Yeah.
I think many people who actually listen to it are surprised by what they hear.
Yeah.
It is by no means as iconoclastic as they might think.
No.
And it is not solely focused on problems in our interpretation of Hebrews. It spends a lot of time, the talk spends a lot of time, Des spent a lot of time thinking about how we use Ellen White and what her authority is. And his presentation, in retrospect, looks pretty constructive, maybe even rather conservative. He doesn't take the easy way out, which is to say, there's a problem here, therefore let's throw her out.
Yeah. No.
He says there's a problem here, and here are some ways I think we can reform Ellen White's leadership. So I think if you just took a person who never heard, didn't even know the controversy, and listened to it, he'd come away thinking, oh yeah, this is pretty constructive.
Yeah.
He's spending a lot of time trying to defend Ellen White. Yeah.
Oh, I've listened to it probably 4 times in the last 2 months.
Would you agree?
And I agree 100%. In fact, it's almost just a beautiful sermon on righteousness by faith. And when I interviewed Kenneth Samples, he said that when he heard it and when he read, he was one of the few that read the 991-page manuscript. He said that, and he's not an Adventist. You know, he was the kind of protege of Walter Martin. He said that it was the most shining example of the gospel that he'd ever heard. So that's a pretty big thing to say. And yeah, I mean, I listened to that. And I think, what was the big fuss? And another person I interviewed, Steve Ferguson, who's a lawyer, a young guy, he's only in his early 30s or mid-30s, he said that in many ways Des lost the battle but won the war because most Adventists would listen to that recording now and think, yeah, that's the Adventist gospel as we see it. And I guess that's what's informing your statement where you're saying, you know, really people aren't thinking about that, the old style Adventism anymore anyway.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who would defend the investigative judgment. And I wouldn't want to say that the investigative judgment is a dead doctrine.
No.
But I would say, even as a defendant, they're defending it in a new way. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I think my additional kind of caveat to that, even though I do think that that in many ways, you know, the teaching of it from the pulpit is less common, my caveat is I think over the horizon, I think we're going to be a bit careful. The Conservatives are pouring their money into 3ABN, to Doug Batchelor, into lots of independent ministries, and that's just a sure sign that they're putting their money where their mouth is. Can you unpack a little bit about your thoughts on how the investigative judgment may have transitioned over the years, not too in depth, but from the great controversy version to the Des Ford era to what is the Adventist official stance at the moment on the investigative judgment?
Well, as I understand it, and you know, at this point I can say I'm no theologian. As I understand it, we are first of all choosing a different terminology.
Yeah, I'm interested in when you said that before too. Can you unpack that a bit more? What do you mean by different terminology?
Well, instead of using the terminology investigative judgment, we're
saying sanctuary more now.
Or pre-Advent judgment.
Or pre-Advent, okay.
The other thing is, I think, as we look at the book of Hebrews, our argument is a somewhat more defensive argument. The challenge from Des said, Hebrews does not teach the investigative judgment. The defense that was mounted to that would say, well, it doesn't teach it directly, but it's not inconsistent with it.
Right.
So that's again a kind of a more defensive position. But I'm not, I'm not an expert on this. It just seems like the doctrine once answered a more compelling existential question than it does now.
When I read the latest,
and I don't think this would be such a big deal if you didn't have the question of, well, wait a minute, does this threaten the authority of Ellen White?
yeah. In an interview I did with Dr. Lyndon Rogers, he read from a letter that had been discovered, written from Neil Wilson to Pearson, and they were in the letter. Neil was saying this issue is not really about righteousness by faith or the sanctuary; it's about Des Ford questioning the authority of Ellen White, and that's what we need to protect.
I think
that's not the exact quote.
yeah.
But that was the gist of it.
I have a very interesting letter here that Ted Heppenstall sent to Des Ford.
Oh.
This is November 3, 1979. In other words, just days after that famous talk.
Wow.
He wrote, yesterday I received a tape on your address interpreting the investigative judgment in Hebrews 9. You expressed my convictions right down the line, period. Now, you can imagine how Des would receive that.
Yeah.
Goes on to say some interesting things. I was worried some when you dealt with the inspiration of Ellen White. You were bound to get negative reactions. I hope and pray we've come to the time when these matters can be brought out into the open. There is nothing more important than a true exegesis of the Bible. But for the less educated minds and the doubtful, slipping Adventists, watch your flanks as you go by. Take warning from me. Do not begin to prophesy until the time is ripe. Don't give anyone the opportunity to banish you to the lower regions. If you are to be a great biblical scholar in heaven, you have to begin down here, and a safe one at that.
Wow.
A very, very complicated message there. On the one hand, I agree with you, but be careful how you say this.
And maybe that's why when at Glacier View, when Ford kind of looked over for support from Heppenstall, Heppenstall stayed sitting down and remained quiet, because he might have felt Des had gone down a path that he couldn't support.
Well, and it's interesting to see, again, I'm speaking as a non-theologian, it's interesting to see at Glacier View how many scholars whose critique of traditional Adventist positions was more radical than Des's, who said very little.
Yeah.
And I think that must have frustrated him. He's offering a public position, one that is as conservative as he can offer it. And people who are saying privately, you've identified a real problem, but I'm not persuaded by your conservative solution.
Yes, yeah.
Are not rushing to the barricades to defend him. I think there's another kind of question we need to ask here in relation to Glacier View, and that is, why wasn't there a split in the church? And we know a lot of people lost their jobs, but why wasn't there a reformed Seventh-day Adventist church created that?
My theory is there was a split, but the Liberals just don't realise it yet.
Well, in what way did that split manifest itself?
It manifested itself in people gathering together, having different meetings, developing over the years a different jargon, a different.
Oh, okay.
Like when I organised a Des Ford talk about 6 years ago, just down here in Kurrambong.
Yeah.
I'd had it originally organised on this Adventist school in the hall, their chapel, but I was told a week before that it wasn't allowed to be on Adventist soil, and so we moved it to the local Uniting Church. and there were 350 people there in the morning, and we had a Q&A in the afternoon. There was almost 350 for that, and it felt like a gathering of a tribe. It felt like here is this second church, and perhaps in Australia you notice it very clearly. In Currumbong you've got Avondale College Church, you've got the Memorial Church, and though there is lots of wonderful connection between the two, there is, I believe, and I've said it a lot and had no support for this theory, but that there actually are two churches in one already.
Well, I think that there were a lot of people ready to support the idea of two organizationally separate churches.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would say one of the most important reasons that we did not have a split in 1982 is the choices of Desmond Ford.
Exactly. Yeah.
He had people who were ready.
Yeah.
To
100%.
create a separate organization, a separate funding, separate system. If he would renounce some of his own understandings of Adventism. I think in particular, if he had moved from Glacier View to a kind of wholesale repudiation of Ellen White, a lot of people would have followed him.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't do that because he had as I said, a constructive view, a conservative view of Ellen White. He had himself learned a great deal from Ellen White, even though he didn't believe that she was inerrant.
No.
He wanted to affirm her. So in a way, we have Desmond Ford to thank for church unity in places like Northern California.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I think I think not only did he take the path he did because he didn't want to renounce some of these ideas, but also because he knew that if he did, it would be very damaging to the church. And he loved the Adventist church, and I think Jill will correct me here, but I'm pretty sure he stayed a member right up to the mid-2000s and attended Adventist churches quite regularly.
Well, and he continued to affirm the Sabbath, although some people wanted to go out to the Sabbath, including, I think, Brinsmead.
Yeah. That's what I was saying before. If Brinsmead had been the one who'd taken the PVC forum and tapes had gone around the world and a Glacier View had him under trial, I think the church would have split bang down the middle, and he would have gotten behind that quite wholeheartedly. I might be wrong.
The question I keep wrestling with is, was there some basis for compromise? And I would say the same thing today. As you see a church divided over the issue of women's ordination, is there some basis for compromise? Is there some basis for people who don't agree to work together? And I would say in each case, if you decide to go for total victory, unconditional surrender of your opponents, we're in big trouble. And we haven't really taught a lot of time. We haven't emphasized the value of compromise.
So just jumping in again, 2026, Pete, as I look on the screen, looking a bit older, wiser, who knows? But I have to say something just there on that point. He's talking about compromise and a willingness to present ideas that are different and seeing things in a new way. And I just want to say again that after 5 or 6 years, he and the scholars and academics did produce the compromise that they speak of. Let's put Ellen White in a correct, more appealing, inspirational position rather than an authoritative one. And what happened? What happened when they compromised and tried to present this lovely view of what the church could be? And that's not my Adventism. This is my Adventism. Let's reclaim it. This is my Adventism. Banned within 6 days, taken down from all the bookshelves, taken down from Amazon, only secretly sent out via PDFs. When Adventism of a progressive nature, a more biblical version, when it tries to emerge from within the church's ranks, it is always suppressed, marginalized, cancelled, squashed, quashed, you name it. You don't get to be, oh, that's not my Adventism, this is my Adventism, and shout it from the rooftops. The mothership, the Adventist church, the leaders, the publishing house, the white estate, if they get a whiff of you diminishing Ellen White's authority, you will get cancelled. And here we are watching 5 or 6 years ago this incredible interview with an incredible human, Dr. Eric Anderson. I hope he comes back on the show. But what we're seeing right in front of our eyes is the seeds of what became Reclaiming the Prophet. He's suggesting that it is possible to reach a compromise with the progressive Adventists and the traditional Adventists and the leadership, and it failed and will continue to fail. That's my prediction. Back to the program. 2020. I think I said 2025. 2020. Here we go. Enjoy.
Compromise is sort of a dirty word.
I think that church number 2 over here, of which you're a member, of which I was a member, of which, you know, a number of the more liberal progressive people watching are a member and they don't realise it, that church would compromise. That church would say, hey, you can support women's ordination or not. Hey, you can support your view on righteous by faith whichever way you want. They're more interested in unity through diversity. But the other church, they are, excuse if I'm not supposed to say this, but they are hell-bent on removing you. It's my show, I guess I can say it. They are hell-bent on removing you, church number 2. They do not want you there. And I mean, some of the meetings...
Well, are you sure that one side has the monopoly on toleration or compromise? I think of the Episcopal Church, where you have a battle, and the battle begins by saying, we believe in the ordination of women, but we'll tolerate and work with and accept as our brothers and sisters in Christ the people who disagree with us. That doesn't last for long.
Interesting.
It begins by saying we need toleration for those areas of the church that want to have women's ordination. It moves on to say, if you reject that, we will have to throw you out of the church. You see the same thing with gay marriage. The church starts out by saying, we want the freedom in this diocese to celebrate gay marriages. It quickly becomes, if any diocese refuses to do that, we will get rid of that bishop.
But isn't that just an example that confirms my point? That it comes to a point where church number 1 wants you out. Church number 2 would go on for decades having the 2 intention. Like
but the liberals in this case are the intolerant ones. In the case of the Episcopal Church, they're the ones saying anybody who doesn't agree with us on women's ordination or on gay marriage.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Church, you see.
Yes.
So
the 3 churches then.
Well, compromise is a really difficult thing, and I've spent some time thinking over the last couple of years. Okay, we have a world church in Adventism where the majority, I think it's safe to say, is opposed to women's ordination, but in North America and Australia, the majority is in favor of it.
Yeah.
How do you politically deal with that? How do you prevent an unnecessary schism over that? I'm not hearing kind of creative political thinking that says, well, okay, we'll give you this, you give us that, we'll have a kind of way of getting along over the next 5 years until the thing comes up again.
Yeah. Well, I think you need, if you are going to be a church that compromises, you have to continue with that stance of being willing to compromise. You can't suddenly become the liberal person that won't compromise, and you can't be the other person that won't compromise.
Well, and we had a compromise in the Adventist Church that seemed to be working under Jan Paulsen,
Yeah.
which was in North America we will have commissioned ministers and we'll have ordained ministers, and there's hardly any difference between them. And we'll do that as a way of avoiding conflict with the world church.
Mm.
But there seem to be some people who.
Sorry. I will try not to do this. It's just such a seminal, important season 2, episode 34 conversation. When he said then, and progressives and liberal Adventists just love throwing away these lines. It was a compromise that seemed with very little difference. Commissioned female pastors, ordained male pastors. Oh, there's very little difference. It was a good compromise that Jan Paulsen introduced. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a good compromise. We know because of stuff that went down about 5 years ago in our own union, it was revealed that in one particular photo, of the 23 jobs represented, only 10 were available to women because they were commissioned, not ordained. That's not a good compromise. And the other thing that's not a good compromise is how silent these progressives are when they're employed. All the pastors out there watching that behind the scenes really support women's ordination, but publicly won't dare say a word about it. You're complicit. That's not a good compromise. Your silence is demonstrating you're being complicit in the suppression of women in the SDA church. Now, I don't mind. Who cares? If you have done study and drawn the conclusion that women shouldn't be ordained or commissioned and should sit in the church and not speak, and that's your decision based on your study, okay, fine. In many ways, you aren't being duplicit. You're saying this is what you believe. I'm talking about the process of saying one thing behind the scenes and another in public that denies women the freedom to be genuinely and truly equal. Jan Paulsen's compromise was a terrible compromise. I will now go back to the show and try my best to not interrupt. 2026, Pete, going back to 2020.
Who want to undo that compromise.
Yeah.
And there are actually some people who want to undo the compromise of about 1980 or 1978 that said we will have women elders, local elders.
Mm.
So I think once you get the suspicion that there are people in the church who want to reverse earlier compromises, it's much harder.
Yeah. It's
one of the key moments for our church was in 2011 when the annual council voted on this proposal that a conference president could either be an ordained minister or a commissioned minister.
Mm.
And that would have been a pretty simple compromise.
Mm.
It would affect very, very few people. In fact, I think at that time it affected one person.
Mm.
And that was refused. That was rejected. And that helped to create some of the divisions we have now.
I think all male ordained ministers who support women's ordination should hand in their ordination and accept a commissioning.
Yeah, and that was obviously an option.
Yeah.
And we've heard this interesting argument that that's not allowed. But I don't understand why it's not allowed.
That's interesting. And yeah, I was kind of filled with hope with the Jan Paulsen era. And when I saw him booed at the GC that time, and when I saw him at that was terrible, wasn't it? And when I saw him at the Autumn Council, almost begging to Ted Wilson, please do not go down this path, and Ted then just at the end of that 2 minutes said, well, you guys voted it in, Mike 3, and I thought, for such a man deserving of huge respect, he has been in some ways treated quite badly post his presidency. Can I I want to dig a little bit into Glacier View. You weren't there, but I'm interested in some of your thoughts on that. But before we go to that, you mentioned Jack Castle and Dean Madgwick. Were they both let go later at some point?
No, neither one of them was let go.
Right.
They both resigned.
Right. Was it because they were kind of encouraged to resign?
Well, I think they got tired of the endless controversy. And when Jack Castle resigned in 1983, I think he thought there would be other opportunities for him. And he was offered one opportunity, but he wasn't impressed with it. He was offered the presidency of Home Study International, the online, well, now online version of education. He thought that was not very serious. Now, Gordon Madgwick went on to be the head of the Board of Higher Education in Washington. So he had another role. It is a bit mysterious and really hard to justify. Not only that Castle didn't get another position or wasn't offered another position, he was sort of ignored for many years at PUC.
Really?
And that is hard to justify.
And he was president at PUC for a while there.
11 years.
11
one of the
years.
longest serving presidents.
Did he'd be passed now, I guess?
Yes, he died 2 or 3 years ago. Now, in his case, his historical reputation is complicated by a piece of architectural history.
Sorry, I missed that.
We had a historic building, the building in which Des Ford gave his talk.
Yeah.
Irwin Hall Chapel, and he felt that building was too old to be preserved and tore it down, which enraged many alumni. And in a way, there were probably a lot more people upset about tearing down Irwin Hall than about the theology department.
His involvement
down there.
Yeah, then more than his involvement with the church politics and theology and admin. We mentioned before we came on that Jonathan Butler and you'd had a chat with him. What did he give you any advice before coming on to the program?
No, not particular. It was interesting as I was talking to John that he, as an ex-Adventist, he had a more constructive view of Ellen White, just as looking at her as an historian, than say some of his colleagues.
Has Jonathan left the church? I didn't know that.
Jonathan's not an active Adventist. He remains very interested in Adventism.
Yeah, okay.
And as an historian, he is rather impatient with the point of view that simply presents Ellen White as some kind of a fraud.
Yes.
He's had a number of ex-Adventists or angry Adventists of one sort or another who want him to endorse that point of view.
Yeah.
And he's saying that doesn't explain her huge influence, the difference she made.
Yeah.
It's not a very interesting approach as far as explaining a history. So Jonathan, although in a certain sense he's not an active Adventist, ends up seeing Ellen White as a very remarkable person, a very successful person. In a way, you have something similar with this book that came out with Oxford University Press, the Ellen Harmon White book.
Yeah, who wrote that one?
A group of scholars, some of whom are not Adventists at all, coming away saying, "Oh, what an interesting person! How come we didn't know about her?
Yeah.
Let's look into her, which is very different from the kind of muckraking fury that we find among some Adventists and ex-Adventists that
More like the Walter Ray.
she's a humbug, she's a fake,
Yeah.
and they're saying, oh no, that's not true at all. In fact, I think we're in a period of time where Ellen White is getting more respect and more interest from the general public than we once thought. We once sort of thought this was just an Adventist thing.
In my interview with him and Ron Numbers, it was a very, very informative interview, and they banter and mock each other in using a lot of dry wit. And I kind of cottoned onto it, and there was one moment, I'm not sure if it's in the pre-interview or actually in the interview, where I made a straight-faced joke with John Butler and the release of his book that's non-existent at this stage, on the biography of Ellen, and they both paused and then, oh, right, we get that you get our humour now, and they they both laughed. And it was interesting because John did unpack that when he does write his biography of Ellen White, he's not going to be doing this big expose kind of thing. He is wanting to do a balanced view.
Yeah.
Now you've written a lot on Ellen White too. What's your view?
Well, not a lot. I wrote a chapter, that Oxford book, on Ellen White and the Civil War and slavery and race relations.
Right. So you've written in that book that was released by Oxford, and didn't Ron Numbers do the foreword or something in that?
Well, he's one of the editors of it. He was one of the editors of that, along with Gary Land and Terry Amott. I also wrote something on Josiah Litch and the prophecies relating to Turkey.
Yeah.
But those would be the main things that I've done in Adventist history.
So what would you say what's your view then of the role of Ellen G. White in the church?
Well, I think you take the Civil War, for example. We are making a terrible mistake if we see her as primarily predictive.
She's more confirmative.
You say, well, let's see, you've got a prophet in your church, so you're going to know how the next battle is turning out.
Yeah.
You're going to know how the next election turns out. That's not the way it works at all.
She wasn't a psychic.
Because it's not a magical thing. The focus of her ministry in the Civil War period is on the duty of the believers. So she'll have a lot to say about, should we volunteer to serve in the war? She will not have inside information that says, oh, it looks bad right now, but it's going to turn out okay in the end.
Right.
And the same thing will happen after the war. She will have a lot of very specific counsel to the Adventists, saying, we need to reach out. We need to have a ministry to the former slaves, the freedmen. She doesn't say, okay, here's what's going to happen next. But she really hounds people on, you are overlooking this population. You're not doing what God wants you to do. And there will be people who eventually will take her words seriously, do things like her son Edson White, who goes down to Mississippi and reaches out to the black population, or the people who found Oakwood College, or again, moved by her counsel and advice. So if we're going to understand how Ellen White worked in the church, I think we need to get away from the purely predictive element to thinking about, okay, what is her prompting church members as here's what you ought to do. In the case of the Civil War, there are lots of things that she doesn't understand, but it seems like her overall counsel is something we'd be proud of. She sees slavery as wrong. She sees the Civil War as caused by slavery, and afterwards she's saying we have a responsibility. And there are plenty of people who are not saying things like that at that time. She's saying something very constructive.
And I think she recognized that there had to be certain policies that the government were supporting in play that as a church they had to kind of go along with, even though fundamentally she didn't agree with them. She seemed to have those kind of insights.
Well, there's times when she'll compromise on on the social conditions of the South, but it's always until the Lord shows us a better way.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's never a matter of this is God's plan to have segregation, and so. But that would be one example of Ellen White's role. I think other examples that I would see as very constructive are the picture of Christ that she gives in Desire of Ages, which is a fuller and more orthodox picture than Uriah Smith and a lot of other people had at the time. So the way to understand Ellen White is not this notion that she's inerrant or that she has no historical context, but that she's helping to push the church in a direction of growth, I think, with understanding of salvation, with understanding of our responsibilities toward our neighbors, all those kinds of things. Maybe that's closer to the way a Lutheran would understand Luther or a Methodist would understand Wesley than to this idea that she was completely separate from her time and had no context and made no mistakes. It's certainly a more plausible, more interesting approach to take.
Do you?
And I think it's not too far from. I mean, isn't that what Des was saying?
Yeah, yeah. You may have been fired in '82 if you'd said that. Do you think that it's important to think that Ellen White had supernatural prophetic visions, and that something supernatural did happen in October 22, 1844? Can you be an Adventist? Can you be an Adventist and just think that the Adventist Church is providential rather than something especially happened that night in heaven?
Well, I think certainly there are many Adventists who would say just that God was at work in our early history, even the parts where we misunderstood. So yes, I think you can be an Adventist and believe that. But your other question, you had two questions there, right?
About the role of Ellen G. White, or about what I was just saying just then, about the supernatural nature? Yeah.
Do we have to explain it by saying it's supernatural? I think we have to treat Ellen White like we would treat all prophets. We don't expect perfection from prophets. We expect prophets to be people who respond to a divine impetus or pressure, who move in some ways that surprise themselves, but also in ways that make sense to their community. So I think if we look at it that way, we can see both divine impetus and at the same time human influences, growth over time. I think certainly if we look at what Ellen White writes, her understanding of salvation is clearer and stronger at the end of her life than it was at the beginning. And I think we're seeing now, in the way that Adventist scholars deal with Ellen White, a recognition of that. One really interesting example would be the latest edition of Steps to Christ, put out by the seminary, with the former dean of the seminary as the editor. It treats her with great respect. It treats this as a prophetic message, and yet at the same time, it's very realistic about what her influences were, what the sources were. Says a lot of things about things that she borrowed in writing Steps to Christ, the way the book was put together, that maybe once would have been seen as controversial in some way. That's thoroughly mainstream now.
Do you think, though, if you put prophets into context and understand that their inspiration and their their context and they were human, etc. We don't put into the church. Is it in the actual fundamentals where Adventists see Ellen White as an ongoing authority? Like, I see that we can see her in context as a prophet in her era. Why are the church at pains, go to great pains to point out that that she's an ongoing authority within the church in their actual, public statement to the world?
Well, isn't she an ongoing authority? We look at the institutions we've created. We look at where they're located. Schools like Avondale or PUC. We look at what we teach and how we teach. She's an ongoing influence. Now, we don't follow every detail of what was once the ideal, but certainly we're still moved by Ellen White when we are founding medical institutions, when we're founding colleges, when we're teaching certain things and not certain other things. She's still a powerful influence. It's not like it's a completely...
But why isolate her? Why not go, we support the ongoing authoritative advice of all the prophets?
I think we should.
Yeah.
Certainly, it's a very narrow and inappropriate thing to treat the spirit of prophecy as used in the book of Revelation as only referring to Ellen White.
Now, can you tell us a little bit about Glacier View? Now, you weren't there, but what are your memories of hearing the feedback?
My memories are, as the word came back to PUC, many of us were shocked at the idea that Des would be defrocked. He would lose his ministerial credentials. And we were also...
Because you were friends with Des when you were both...
An acquaintance, I wasn't a close friend of Des's, but I was impressed and moved by his ministry, and I was sympathetic to the point of view that he was expressing.
Right.
I was shocked, I think, by I was shocked by the political ineptness of the theologians.
Say that again.
I was shocked by the political ineptness of the theologians. It didn't seem like they could fight their way out of a wet paper bag.
Yeah.
Here you have a big meeting, and the political issue is, what do we do with Desmond Ford? And it seemed like there were a lot of smart people who could have said something, done something to say, well, whatever we come up with, this is not the right answer. Defrocking Des Ford is the wrong answer.
Why do you
and we won't cover up the interpretive issues that he's raised by firing him. So I'm still disappointed that a person with the talent of Desmond Ford couldn't be given some good assignment in 1982. Why we had to say, you're out. I think an awful lot of it, and I think Gil Valentine is writing quite a bit about this. A lot of it has to do with some specific Australian issues, why he couldn't come back to Australia. Somebody suggested, and I guess it was discussed at the time, make him the director of the New Gallery Centre in London. Wouldn't that have been a great assignment? He's such a great public speaker.
Yeah.
He's so good at explaining Christianity and Adventism to the general public. Why didn't he do something like that rather than saying he's losing his credentials? He's not ordained anymore.
I think Neil Wilson was aware that Des was a once-in-a-generation charismatic figure, that wherever you put him, there was going to be a potential challenge to the authority of Ellen White.
Well, it seems like if we look closely at that issue, he's offering some promising answers as to how to defend the authority of Ellen White. And if somebody doesn't see that, I wonder, do they understand the question? Do they understand the evidence?
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. Can you tell us a little bit of your thoughts on the consensus document that Des seemed to happy to go along with, and why last minute Neil Wilson cajoled a few
Well,
people to put together the
there are
10-point statement?
who know that better than I do, but it seems like we have the scholars doing a typical scholarly thing, coming up with a statement that everyone can agree with, and missing the point that the purpose of the meeting from a political standpoint is very different.
Exactly.
And I guess somebody said, when told that Desmond Ford supported the consensus document, well, then there's something wrong with it. You know,
Yeah.
the goal was to find something that would isolate it.
Yeah. Of
That would
course
identify him
they're
as
going to, I mean, of
as
course they're going to bring out the 10-point document, a
Yeah.
10-point statement, because Neil was wanting Des gone. Was Neil Wilson such a formidable foe that all the scholars became a little timid around him?
I don't know. I don't think I ever saw him in action. I know a lot of people really respected him and liked him and saw him as a skillful political leader. I just think he was thinking in terms of achieving certain political goals, and the scholars weren't.
Yeah, they're
And
almost
it
a
took
bit
them a
oblivious.
while to even see, and I don't quite get that. It seems like the basic question is, can you be an Adventist and believe the things that Desmond Ford believes?
Mm.
And if, as a matter of fact, you can, well, then there are ways to absorb this challenge.
Mm. Just before I forget, the book that you contributed a chapter to, what's it called again? And I'd love if there's people watching
Oh,
that.
Ellen Harmon White, American Prophet.
Ellen Harmon White, American Prophet. If someone watching could just put a link to that for us just so it's part of this interview and document.
Now, one other thing I want to mention before I forget it here. One of the books that was crucial in the run-up to the Ford crisis was a book by an Anglican called The Shaking of Adventism.
Yes, I've got that right here.
And I think in retrospect, the issues as Paxton saw them were actually more complicated than I guess he saw them. You know, he argued that the gospel had to be presented in a Lutheran way. And he presented all these non-Lutheran presentations of the gospel as false or dangerous or something like that. From an Adventist standpoint, we've been Wesleyans all along.
Interesting.
And I think that maybe some of the debate about Desmond Ford is related to that. I think there were some people who perhaps didn't give enough recognition to our Wesleyan roots. I think certainly, from my standpoint as a young teacher, there were wonderfully liberating things about Des's focus on justification, on the sort of the Lutheran approach.
Mm.
I think in the years since then, I've learned there's some wonderful things in the Wesleyan approach as well.
Mm.
And I think in Adventism today, there are a lot of people who would be open to learning from that Wesleyan approach, learning from ancient Christians, whether Orthodox or Catholic, about a holy living approach, which would be sanctification as well as justification. You know,
Whereas
and maybe those theological terms are too worn out, but I think that what we needed in the 1970s was a reminder of righteousness by faith.
Mm.
What we may need now is a reminder of what some people call spiritual formation. but there's an explosive term too.
Well, you've just lost your job for sure if you're
Okay, okay.
I spoke to Japhet, one of the founders of the One Project,
Yes.
and they've been accused of spiritual formation and connections to a university which has a lecturer in it that allegedly inspired them, and he is a known Jesuit. So.
Oh yeah, there's so many of these known Jesuits, and I can't get over the married Jesuits.
Yeah, I for the first time got called a Jesuit last year, and I was wondering if it would ever happen, and I kind of felt I got called a tool of Satan and a Jesuit in the same week.
Well, it is interesting to see what we've done with the Jesuits. My favorite example was when the current Pope was elected. And by the way, I find myself a lot more sympathetic to Benedict than I do to the current Pope. But anyway, when the current Pope was elected, certain Adventist independent ministries types sent out a mailing warning about the Jesuits and quoting from a book that gave the Jesuit oath of allegiance. Now, it turns out you look closely and the book is a novel.
Oh.
A novel published in the 1830s, and there's no validity to it, but it got quoted. This is what the Jesuits believe.
Wow.
Kind of like the people who said that Pope Francis's older brother was an Adventist.
That's right.
But I guess he doesn't have an older brother.
So that's just an urban myth as well.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that one did do the rounds.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
tell us a little bit more of your thoughts on spiritual formation and what you find interesting about it.
Well,
And for
I
those
think-
that don't know, can you give us a definition?
spiritual formation is not a very mysterious thing. It simply means discipleship. And I think the emphasis on spiritual formation is a way of saying, all right, after I've been forgiven, after I've been justified, how should I live? And a Christian life needs to have that balance. A Christian life needs to recognize that we're forgiven through no merit of our own, but also to talk about how we live afterwards. In the evangelical world, I suppose the most prominent writer who writes about spiritual formation issues would be Richard Foster. He wrote a book a few years ago called The Celebration of Discipline. Scary title. Some people are so scared they can't go beyond that word discipline. He's talking about fasting and silence and simplicity and study and meditation and all the things that Christian thinkers over the centuries have talked about. He also wrote a wonderful book on prayer. Now, it's true that in the Adventist Church and in the evangelical world, there are a few people who have been very suspicious of this Quaker who is writing about holy living, who's writing about the whole idea of being, as Peter put it, partakers of the divine nature. But I think overall, you've seen a kind of balance showing up in the evangelical world among Protestants, where we're saying, yes, we are forgiven, but what next? And how do we live next? And I think that's a very healthy thing in the Adventist Church. I know there's some who don't agree with me. I even wrote an essay about 9 years ago in Review. Its original title was, I admit it, I'm a mystic, and so was Ellen White. But the
Nice and provocative.
the title that we eventually settled on was, What is Mysticism?
Right.
And the way I was defining mysticism was simply saying direct experience of God. That's not terribly dangerous or new age or anything like that. The part of our experience where we talk about direct experience of God, I think in Ellen White we find some very powerful statements that talk about this experience. My favorite one is in Steps to Christ, where she says the disciples of Christ had a closer relationship with Jesus after the ascension than before.
Mm.
If you believe that, you are a believer in spiritual formation.
Interesting. Well, like at the time post Glacier View, um, did you kind of have similar thoughts back in those days, or have these thoughts kind of
Well, I
adapted?
went through
And
a long process. The question that my students sometimes ask me, or more likely they're afraid to ask me, is they say, well, look at all your friends from those days. Look at the other scholars, and they start naming names, who wrote about these issues and then stopped being Adventists. Why are you still an Adventist?
yeah, that's where I was going.
And I have an answer that I admit is a little bit provocative. Maybe it is deliberately provocative. But I think I remained an Adventist by becoming a Christian. Now maybe that's a little deliberately provocative, but I
I
think
like your titles.
I think that in response to all the crisis in the Adventist Church, I needed to go back and look at what is core in Christianity. And in my own teaching, I spent a lot of time in the honors program reading things that were Christian classics. In fact, at this last quarter, I taught a class with a small group of honors students where we read Pilgrim's Progress.
Apologies, this will be a brief one. This is why myself and Ron Kelly, in our interview when we discussed progressive Adventists, this is why I believe progressive Adventists unravel real Adventism. Adventism is such a unique denomination with an incredibly provocative, bold claim that it literally had revealed to it via Ellen G. White the plan of salvation, and to achieve the goal of concluding the final day's outcomes, the plan has to be followed very closely. And so when Seventh-day Adventists who are focusing on being Christians and focusing on the gospel, when they are leaders, academics, scholars, and pastors who then teach, as Dr. Eric just said, their students, they teach them this watered down version of Adventism. And these are the people that cry out when they hear me say real Adventism, oh, that's not my Adventism. That's right, because the Adventism you believe is the watered down version, the hybrid version, the new version that has been taught to you by these academics, scholars, pastors, preachers, and teachers who unravel the unique pillars of Ellen White's, hey guys, God told me this specific, unique, very hard to follow, but necessary to follow plan. Adventism is not hey, it's like a normal benign Protestant movement that you can cherry pick. It has incredibly specific teachings and doctrines that Ellen White confirmed in vision were true and necessary to follow. So if you want your cultural Adventism, if you want your progressive Adventism, if you want, hey, that's not my Adventism, this is my Adventism over here, you need to jettison, as Frank Merendino calls it, You need to jettison those pillars. But guess what? If you jettison those pillars, goodbye to the unique, bold claim of having a plan of salvation given to you via Ellen White for these last days. Progressives, please stop unraveling this denomination. You're causing more harm than good. Back to 2020.
We read Dante's Divine Comedy. We read the Brothers Karamazov, and we read C.S. Lewis's biography. And the question that we wrestled with in that class, and really for 20 or 30 years, is there a common Christian tradition that unites all of these people? The Calvinist Bunyan, the Catholic Dante, the Orthodox Karamazov, the Anglican Lewis. And if there is, where do we fit in? So that's what I meant by I remained an Adventist by becoming a Christian. I'm spending a lot of time trying to look at the overall Christian tradition and coming away with a sense that, yes, Adventists are part of that Christian tradition, or should be, and that I can learn a lot from those other Christians, whether it's using the Book of Common Prayer in my own devotions, or going on a silent retreat, or reading materials that are coming out of that long Christian tradition. I don't find that doing that causes me to give up on the Sabbath or lose interest in the second coming.
I'm very interested that you've said that. I've myself have participated in lots of those kind of activities, and found them very very beneficial. So it's nice to hear that you've kind of explored those things as well.
Well, experiencing God is more important than winning a theological argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Or smiting our enemies or whatever.
And exactly. And I think people that are viewing the interviews hopefully get that I personally don't sit there and lose any sleep over these interesting and in-depth discussions on theology, politics, and admin, because my main focus in life is my family and my connection to this kind of oneness and the spiritual formation approach.
The Adventist who I think has done the best at this is John Dibdall.
Yeah.
He wrote a wonderful book called Hunger.
He's been greatly criticized by the conservatives.
Yes, I'm afraid so. And he really did a second edition of the book that tied it to some specifically Adventist sources, but it couldn't be published by an Adventist publisher.
Yeah, interesting.
But you can get it. Hunger. It's a wonderful book.
I think he's been on the list of someone Jill or Lance is trying to get to do an interview with, so that'll be interesting.
I don't know if he was at Glacier View or not.
Yeah, okay. At the time after Glacier View, a lot of people were called into the office and given kind of the DES test, where anyone that was suspiciously supportive of DES was asked to kind of lay their cards on the table. Did anyone call you in and say, are you a Fordite or something like that?
Well, I got in trouble for various things, but remember, I was a history teacher.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that helped. And the other thing was, I think there was a kind of a unwritten understanding that as the church came close to the edge of a formal split, I think church leaders decided not to go after the religion departments.
Yeah, okay.
They went after the young pastors.
Right.
And they fired a bunch of them.
Yeah.
But they didn't fire their teachers.
Interesting. That's probably what happened here too. What kind of number do you think there? When I watched the Ankerberg show where Bill Johnson was being interviewed, Ankerberg was suggesting there was around 200 had left as a
in the world.
In America, in the USA, in the United States.
Yeah,
Australia, the figure's around 180 as a direct result of Glacier View, and he was suggesting that his research, and Walter Martin's research was about 200.
That could be right. I don't know. I know here in Northern California, I can think of half a dozen very definite ones where people were
There's the gentleman that I've interviewed, Gordon Hammond. I'm not sure if he's watching today, but he's starting a really interesting ministry called Beyond Glacier View, where he's connecting with a lot of the Adventist ministers that left here in Australia.
really.
And it's a really wonderful thing he's doing, because it's kind of gathering together people in this group, and they can share their stories and find some healing through
What
camaraderie. What's that?
What happened to those people?
Exactly.
Did they become active members of some other church? Or
Well, he, for example, was one that was part of the purging, and then totally cut off from the church. There was no follow-up kind of counselling or help or advice or anything. They were just gone. And his liberal friends couldn't really talk to him, or they'd be seen as potentially they might lose their job. And the Conservatives were glad he was gone, and the admin just dusted their hands. So he went off and spent, I think, the next 20 years, I think, Gordon might be watching and can correct me, but as a kind of a chaplain for it's maybe a hospital or Anglicare or something, and did amazing work helping people with mental health issues, alcoholism, drug addiction, and he got to put his love of being a pastor and pastoral care into practice for the next 20 years. And his wife is actually an amazing cook, and she travels the world now with him. He's an incredible photographer, and she will do kind of cooking shows and critiques. I've just forgotten the proper word for it. A food critic kind of thing, and he'll do photos, and she does the food critics of all around the world. So, he's gone on to have an abundant life, and has expressed that there's been a certain amount of healing from watching these shows. But I think what he's doing is fabulous, because people that felt that purging are kind of getting to gather together and have a sense of camaraderie.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who weren't fired and continue to go to church, but there's a kind of a loss that goes on there.
Yeah.
They wonder about where religious conviction leads, and they come away with their love diminished. I think you could almost say it's a sort of a secret rupture in the Adventist church, I guess.
Yes, yeah, the secret
where
rupture.
a lot of people come away, maybe formally, maybe in some formal way still associated with the church, but they've lost something.
They've lost something, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Well, I really hope you join the group and can share your link to your essay or the article on the mystic. I think that would be really beneficial. A few people have been commenting on the Monitor.
I could probably find that, yeah.
Yeah, they would love to just learn more about that, because if you can focus on those kind of connections, I think that puts a lot of this other stuff into perspective as well, and we'd really appreciate to read more on that. Can you tell us what's the current view of the Ford crisis amongst Adventist scholars?
Well, we had a sort of a small informal gathering of Adventist scholars thinking about this at the time of the 40th anniversary.
So sorry to interrupt, but you had a special anniversary of the 1979 meeting last year, did you?
We did. We had it. It was a working conference, we called it.
Yeah. Was any of that videoed or recorded?
No. The point was we wanted to have people who'd lived through this and were knowledgeable about it discuss it in a situation where you really didn't have an audience. You're just saying, okay, what does this mean? So we call it a working conference.
Yeah. So share us some insights to that.
Well, I would say there were 4 or 5 things that were really interesting out of that. One was this thing we've already talked about, that there was a huge context. This wasn't an isolated thing. It had to be put in that context. The other was that Ellen White's role was absolutely central to this controversy. Yeah. And there was on Des's part, an effort to conserve her role. There was a lot of talk about personalities, personalities of leaders, personalities of Des, the times where people tried to compromise and were not successful. And there were a number of times, even after Glacier View, where there were attempts at compromise. I think when you talked to Niels Erik Andreasen, you mentioned one in the early 90s. And then I think the work that Gil Valentine is doing is very helpful at reminding us of some sort of practical political issues at work here that helped affect it. We talked not only about 1979, but we talked about Glacier View, we talked about the attempts at compromise later. And I think a lot of us went away wondering, somewhere along the line, could there have been a workable compromise that said, well, we don't all agree exactly on this, but here are the things we do affirm. I'm still thinking about that. We also spent a lot of time looking at some of the records that we now have. The Castle document that I mentioned in the example. Another really interesting document is Fred Veltman, who was the chairman of the religion department here, wrote a 10-page single-space document giving his memories of Glacier View right after it happened.
Oh, so who was that?
Fred Veltman.
Yes.
Who later wrote the important study of Ellen White and Desire of Ages.
Yeah.
Tell us about scholar,
that. Is that available? Is that document available, the 10-page?
Well, it's available if somebody's doing research. We haven't published it.
Yeah.
At some point we might.
Boy, that'd
another set of papers that we have in the UT Center were documents that came from Larry Mitchell, who was a member of the religion department. Larry is a kind of historian's dream in that he would have a conversation with someone and he'd write a memo about it 10 minutes later and put it in the file. And we've got all these kinds of wonderful things where he's talking about his conversation with people. He's talking about letters he got.
Wow.
And there are more people out there who have materials that would be, I think, very helpful when we come to the idea of some kind of...
It'd be wonderful if you could keep us in mind as time goes by and make some stuff available to the group here, because this kind of, as I said earlier, we're kind of forming a document here on social media that can be a resource for people years down the track, and to have that other information available in links would just be fabulous.
Well, we have some of these things, like we have an extended interview with Jack Castle, a video of that, and what we'd like to do is put that online.
With Jack Castle,
the president of PUC,
that we mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
We have interviews with several other of the teachers at that time, and the goal would be at some point to put those online. So, of course, if you just go there and click them.
Yeah, well, if you keep us in mind, like I think we're building a very credible resource here, we would love to have a link to that, and we can share it on the wall.
I think there are a lot of other things out there that we really don't know about yet. I would think that the creation of the General Conference Archives means there's going to be a lot of stuff there that would help explain what happened.
Oh, that's
I don't know how.
exciting.
I think that's all more or less open. I don't think that's closed.
Wow. Well, maybe you can help us there, and viewers that are watching today can do some exploring. People that are watching
I would recommend
amazing
to
things.
your viewers would be Gil Valentine's article in the Seventh-day Adventist Encyclopedia.
Yes.
I think that's out now.
He's got a really good article in there on the Palmdale 1976, which I'm hoping that I can get one of my viewers to share.
Is the article on Glacier View out now?
I don't know. People watching will know. People watching will know, and they'll share it in this program. So 40 years later, are we now able to transcend the polemics of the past?
I hope so. I think so.
And do you think that anything looks different now with the benefit of, hindsight and a historical perspective?
Well, I think that we probably, as we write the history of it, will be less prone to explain everything on the basis of one or two individuals. You know, Neil Wilson versus Des Ford or something like that. We've got some roots here that have got to be taken into account, and both Wilson and Ford are constrained by their history and limited by their history in some ways. Their choices are not necessarily easy ones. So yeah, I think we can come to the point where, well, I think Gill's article is a pretty good example.
Mm.
If it's published in the form that I read it, it's a pretty good example of rising beyond polemics.
I'm really hoping I can get Gil and Kendra on the program.
Oh yeah.
They may be suspicious that I'm trying to reveal people's personal beliefs on the supernatural events of 1844, but I'm happy to go with any direction. Yeah.
I don't think they'd be threatened by such questions at all. But
yeah. Well, put a good word in for me. I know Jonathan Butler has,
okay.
and I know Gil personally, and have asked him, and he's declined for the moment.
Well, I don't know. It may be something to do with specific conditions in Australia. I don't know. But
yeah, and I don't want to. I would never put anyone into a situation that would compromise them anyway. How have you changed your mind in the last 40 years?
well, I think some of the things we just talked about. I think I've learned from a wide range of Christians during that.
Yeah.
And I think I've learned from Ellen White in ways that I probably couldn't have learned from her in 1979. I almost said 1879.
You're older than I thought.
I'm not that old.
You know, there's a few more questions I was going to ask, but you've covered a lot of the answers already. But why do you think there was such anger coming from Ford's opponents? Why were they kicking the person, not the ball, like you kind of alluded to earlier?
The reason they were so angry was they had a sense that there was treason going on. And maybe it wasn't so much with Des as with the scholars in general, this idea that there are people who are pretending to be Adventists, but they don't really believe what they say they believe.
Mm.
And so that would lead people to say, these are deceptive people, they've tricked us, and we need to get them.
Right.
Now that whole point of view is based upon some misunderstandings, I think.
There's some false assumptions there, isn't there?
Well, you can see how people would come to that.
Yeah.
If the scholars speak in a specialized language that means something different to them than to the ordinary people.
Yeah,
and that was what was different about Des. Nobody could accuse him of speaking in a specialized language or hiding what he believed or presenting it in a slippery way.
Yeah.
But I think there was a sense that there were termites at work, and we didn't do something about the termites.
Yeah.
And that's probably why the anger would be so great.
I'm very keen to get some of the angry ones being interviewed. And in the former podcast, before we were going live to video, I've got some interviews there, particularly from young people that are glad that Des was booted. So there's some interesting interviews there. But having the live videos just escalates they're a lot more interesting to watch and listen to. So but I'm having trouble getting two types of people: current employees and conservatives to talk about Glacier View and the sanctuary and investigative judgment. Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
Yeah. Like George Knight said, I've looked down the big list of names you've had interviewed and they're all on one-sided. And I said, yeah, but I've asked every single possible type of person and they're the ones who are saying yes right now.
Yeah. Did George have any suggestions how to deal with that?
Once he realized where I was coming from, um, he did, yeah, he did. I think a lot of people might be not sure where I'm coming from, and that's why there's a hesitancy to be interviewed by me. I'm told I lull people into a false sense of security. So hopefully you haven't felt that today. Why do you think, and we'll make this our last question because you've given us so much of your time today, and I tell you what, I really value it, and I would love to bring you back after the series if you're okay to share more about your thoughts on spiritual formation and to offer people advice and alternatives on how to connect with their God. I think I'd love to just spend an hour or so chatting to you about that down the track, if that was all right.
Well, I was going to tell you the article that I referred to was in the review January 10, 2013. And it's called What is a Mystic?
Right. Yeah. Well, we could, if you were okay with it, we could unpack that because a lot of people would benefit, I think, from exploring some of the things you've talked about in that regard.
Okay, somewhere down the road, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the last question, and this is one we've touched on a little bit, but the spectrum types who kind of speak up so boldly in articles and whatnot, why do you think they didn't give Des, a stronger support?
I think there were quite a few people who were more radical than Des, and that may have caused them to hesitate. That could be part of the answer. Des certainly believed in following the truth wherever it led, and he never had a sense that keeping my job is the most important spiritual principle. Maybe there were some others who felt that way, I don't know. Certainly as a young man, I was ready to explain some of it by cowardice, but maybe that's not fair. I don't know. I do think that the main point is Des is a lot more conservative than these spectrum types. He wasn't exactly their kind of person.
Yeah, interesting.
And maybe he wasn't the ideal person to fight for as far as they were concerned.
Yeah.
I think it was a mistake. I think to fail to defend the idea, well, to fail to engage his ideas,
Yeah.
is not appropriate for people on either side.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a.
I mean, is that fair that what we loosely call the spectrum types didn't necessarily rush to Des's defense?
No, I think it's. I've often wondered, like even when I first started kind of exploring a lot of these concepts on a couple of Facebook groups that I started, it was very difficult to kind of bring the spectrum types. I'm glad we've created a new genre of person.
Yeah.
The spectrum types. They kind of wouldn't really engage with me. Some of them are now because I think they're getting what I'm doing. But there was an interesting kind of almost subgroup of people that just didn't want their path to be messed with the way they were doing it. And maybe there's value in that. But I think you're right, what you were saying there, that the Desford issues should have been engaged with without fear. What did Ellen White advise on Ballinger?
I haven't read all that stuff. I probably need to read that. I think there's some very lengthy counsels on Ballinger.
Yeah.
I haven't read those.
What about the 1919, I know I said we'd finish, but just one last thing. The 1919 conference, that would have, the minutes to that, very interesting conversation had by Prescott and Daniels and those guys. It's interesting that, you know, they were talking about things that we're talking about now, and the document was hidden. And was it 1976 it was found? Do you know much about that? Because you would have been, it would have been around the time you were there.
Well, the one thing that just really intrigues me is both my grandfather and my great grandfather attended that conference, and I don't remember
Wow.
anything about it in family discussions or anything.
And they were
And
at the conference.
yeah,
Oh my
Leon
goodness.
Cavanis was an associate editor of the Review, and C.T. Lewis was the head of the home study at that point, and they were both there.
Wow.
I don't know if they played a big role, but they were there. They knew about what happened, and
And it never came up into conversation in your family
well, of course, you know,
history.
I didn't know either one of those men, but you'd think my parents would
Yeah, you'd think there'd been something in conversation.
have.
That's
Anyway,
fascinating. But do you remember when it surfaced and what you thought at the time?
yeah, oh yeah. When it
Wh-
came out, it was a bombshell, and I think maybe Ron Numbers mentioned to you that his father, who had been very unhappy about what he wrote in Providence of Health, read the 1919 Bible Conference and said, "Oh, okay, now I understand." Daniels was raising some of the same questions.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully
That was
with
kind of a reconciliation between the two.
yeah. Well, hopefully with modern technology, we're able to have these discussions, engage in all the topics, and put the information out there for people to decide for themselves. And I really value you taking your time today, Dr. Anderson. Thank you.
Well, I have an ulterior motive. I mean, I've never visited Australia.
Hey, you're
I
welcome.
got as far as New Zealand, but I haven't been to Australia. So, maybe if I do something like this, I'll get an invitation or something.
Yes. Well, we are gonna run an actual retreat. Hopefully, unless they say I can't have it on Adventist soil anymore, but we're hoping to have it just north of here. There's a beautiful rainforest Adventist retreat right on the ocean,
Oh, really?
and we're going to have guest speakers. You could be one of our guest speakers. We could try and rustle up some money and fly you and your wife over.
Well, in any case, I do need to visit Australia at some point.
Well, I tell you what, that's a beautiful part to visit, and you could fly into Brisbane, come down, and then come and stay here. We're at Kurrambong, and you could catch up with a lot of people. We could run some meetings. We would love to have you here. You could stay. I've got a granny flat. You could stay as long as you wanted to.
This is pretty shameless. I'm started inviting myself places.
Hey, Aussies and New Zealanders are shameless people, so we welcome that honesty. And we've welcomed yours today in the interview. Thank you so much, Eric. It's been
Well, thank you.
fabulous. Thank you very much. Was there anything you wanted to add before we?
No, I'm worried about all these people watching. I know Jill's watching. I hope
Yeah,
she
well,
approved of what I said.
let me just have a look. Are there any negative comments here? Would anyone like to add anything? I'll be able to tell if you hang on a second. Once I stop, I'll be able to tell you how many people watched
Okay.
live
All
today.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we may say farewell. There doesn't appear to be any last minute flags being raised.
Okay.
So I'll say farewell for now. Thank you very much,
Okay. Thank
Eric
you.
Anderson. And I was muted. Sorry about that. I was just saying that the invitation is still open to have. Sorry, the invitation is still open to have Dr. Eric Anderson stay at my place if he ever comes to Australia, and I would love to have him on the show. I'm going to be inviting people like him, um, John Butler back on, and also people like Casebolt, Trenchard, McAdams over the next few weeks. I'm pretty sure that next week Gillian will be joining me to do a bit of a commentary on today's program, mainly because he was instrumental in trying to put out the compromise book, which didn't work. So I'm interested in her thoughts and others, your thoughts as well. And next week I will be interviewing a guy who's been wanting to be on the show for a long time. He's a current Adventist, but I think wishing to be a former Adventist soon. And he's been quite nervous about coming on the show and revealing his identity. Not that he's a high up employee, but because he just doesn't want to, cause any problems at his local church, etc., which I understand. I've not pressured him at all, but he has contacted me this week and is keen to come on next week and share his story. So I hope you can join me for that. And tomorrow, Nancy and Mark Claiborne for our Good News Fellowship. Just keep in mind, Good News Fellowship is only live at this YouTube channel. Just search at Gospel Good News Fellowship. That's the only place we go live. But today, how exciting. We went live to Twitter, to Twitch, 2 YouTube channels, and 1 Facebook group. So that's an exciting bit of progress there. Thanks for your support, everybody. I think we nearly made the $120 aim I had today to pay for that Twitter account. And we got to $90, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Well, look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow at Good News Fellowship, and next week back here on SDAQ&A. See ya.